From the top floor of City Tower, Marcus Johnson looks like he has it all. Precision suits, gold pens, a skyline throne. But grief hollowed him out, and while he chased contracts, a stranger's smile turned his home into a prison. One night, he comes back early and hears his daughter whisper, "Please don't hurt us." The lie shatters. Bruises, locked doors, a nanny's secret photos, a friend who's really a predator. Tomorrow brings a courtroom, a judge, and a little girl brave enough to tell the truth. This isn't about power anymore. It's about presence. A father wakes up, a family fights back, and the light that went out comes burning home. Marcus Johnson was the kind of man people in the city looked up to. At 40 years old, he had built himself into a symbol of success, a tall, dignified black businessman in perfectly tailored suits, working from the top floor of the sleek City Tower downtown. The gold pen on his desk, the polished leather shoes, the view of skyscrapers through the floor-to-ceiling windows, everything spoke of money, power, and achievement. But behind the polished surface, Marcus's heart was hollow. He hadn't always been this way. Once there had been laughter in his home. Once there had been Sarah, his wife, his partner, his best friend. She had been the kind of woman who brought warmth into every room. When she smiled, Marcus felt like the world made sense. When she died suddenly after giving birth to their son James, the light went out of his life. Marcus was left alone with a newborn boy and a 6-year-old daughter, Mary. Instead of leaning into fatherhood, grief swallowed him whole. He escaped into business trips, late nights, and endless paperwork. It was easier to bury himself in contracts than to face the empty silence of his home. Mary, bright-eyed and gentle, had lost both her mother and, in many ways, her father too. She became protective of her baby brother, holding him close as if she could shield him from everything wrong in the world. James, just an infant, would never know his mother's touch. For months, Marcus barely held his son, barely looked into his daughter's eyes. He told himself he was working to provide for them, but deep down, he was hiding, from his pain, from his children, from himself. It was during this fragile time that Veronica appeared. She had been Sarah's friend, someone Marcus had trusted. She stepped into the house with comforting words and a helpful smile, caring for Mary and James when Marcus could not. At first, it seemed like a blessing. She knew how to soothe James's cries, how to comb Mary's hair, how to fill the empty space Sarah had left behind. Marcus believed she was rescuing the family, patching holes in their broken lives. He let himself believe she was the answer. But on this particular evening, months later, Marcus felt a tug deep in his chest. He had just finished signing contracts in his cold, bright office when the thought struck him. What if he went home early? What if, instead of staying out another night, he returned to the big house in the suburbs and surprised his children? Maybe Mary would run into his arms. Maybe James, though still a baby, would smile when he saw his father's face. For the first time in months, Marcus felt a flicker of warmth. Without telling anyone, he grabbed his coat and left the tower. His car sped along the highway as the city lights gave way to quiet neighborhoods and tree-lined streets. The iron gates of his suburban mansion opened slowly, revealing the house that once rang with laughter and now sat mostly in silence. Tonight, Marcus thought, things will be different. Tonight, he would be a father again. Inside, the marble floor gleamed beneath the chandelier, but the air felt heavy, still. Marcus set down his bag, loosening his tie. That's when he heard it, the faint, broken sound of a child crying. His chest tightened. Then, layered over the crying, came a trembling voice, small and pleading. "Please, don't hurt me and my brother anymore." Marcus froze. The voice was Mary's, his daughter's. His stomach turned to ice. Every nerve in his body screamed as he followed the sound down the hall. He stopped at the living room doorway, hidden just out of sight.
His hands trembled as he clutched the doorframe. What he saw on the other side would change his life forever. Marcus's heart was pounding as he stood in the doorway, staring into the living room. Just hours ago, he had imagined his daughter running into his arms, his infant son reaching for him with chubby hands. That vision shattered instantly. Mary sat on the floor, her pink dress dirty and torn, her small arms wrapped protectively around baby James. Her hair, once neatly tied in ribbons by her late mother, now hung in messy strands across her face. James's tiny cheeks were red and wet from crying, his fists clutching at Mary's dress, as if he knew she was the only safety he had left. Standing above them was Veronica. She looked immaculate in a tight red dress, her black hair styled into perfect curls, her lips painted deep crimson. But the voice that cut through the room wasn't sweet. It was sharp, venomous. "I told you not to cry. You ruined everything with your whining," she snapped, her hand raised as if ready to strike again. Marcus couldn't breathe. His throat tightened as rage and disbelief flooded him. That gentle friend of Sarah's, the woman he thought had saved his family, was now towering over his children like a predator. "Stop!" The word tore from Marcus's throat, rough and commanding. Veronica spun around, her eyes wide in mock surprise. Then, like a mask slipping into place, her face softened into a sugary smile. "Oh, Marcus, you're home early," she said sweetly, her tone dripping with false innocence. She stepped toward him, placing a delicate hand on his jacket. "I was just teaching the kids some rules. They were being too wild." Marcus moved past her, kneeling awkwardly on the marble floor as he reached for James. His hands trembled. Months had passed since he'd last held his son. James squirmed, whimpering, but when Marcus cradled him close, the baby's cries softened. The warmth of his small body against his chest pierced Marcus's heart like a blade. "Mary, come here, sweetheart," Marcus said gently, holding out his free hand. But Mary didn't move. She sat frozen, her wide, fearful eyes darting between her father and Veronica. Veronica chuckled lightly, brushing invisible dust off her dress. "Oh, Marcus, darling, don't get so worked up over a little childish crying. You've been gone so long you don't understand how they behave. I've been with them every day. I know what's best." Her words were like poison wrapped in honey. She tilted her head, smiling sweetly, but Marcus caught it, the flash of cold anger in her eyes. Then he saw it, the torn hem of Mary's dress. He reached out and touched the fabric. It wasn't frayed from climbing trees or playing outside, as Veronica was already beginning to explain. It looked ripped, violently, as though someone had grabbed and yanked it hard. "Is that true, Mary?" he asked Marcus softly, his voice trembling. "Were you climbing trees?" Mary's lip quivered. She opened her mouth, then quickly closed it, glancing at Veronica. The fear in her eyes told Marcus everything he needed to know. James whimpered in his arms, and Marcus noticed something that made his stomach lurch. Red marks dotted the baby's tiny arm, finger-shaped bruises. Marcus's blood ran cold. "What are these marks, Veronica?" His voice was no longer soft. It was sharp, venomous. "Oh, those? Babies are so fussy. Sometimes I have to hold him firmly so he doesn't slip. The doctor said little marks are normal." Marcus stared at her, fury burning in his chest. He knew what those marks were. He was a father. He knew the difference between a safe hold and bruises left by cruelty. Just then a quiet voice broke the tension. "Mr. Johnson." Marcus turned to see Mrs. Deborah standing hesitantly in the doorway. She had been with the family for years, first helping Sarah, then quietly tending to the house after her death. Tonight, her warm brown eyes looked clouded with fear. "I didn't know you were coming home early," she said softly. Her gaze flicked to the children, then to Veronica, then back to Marcus, as if she wanted to say more but couldn't. "Mrs. Deborah has been such a help. She knows how difficult it is managing children when their father is away so much." Veronica chimed in smoothly, her smile tightening. Deborah nodded faintly, but Marcus caught it, the flash of worry, the silent plea in her eyes. Something was terribly wrong. He looked down at Mary again. Her thin arms clutched his leg now, as if afraid he might leave. James's small hand tugged at his shirt collar, his big eyes searching his father's face. For the first time in months, Marcus truly saw them, and what he saw broke him. His children weren't wild. They weren't spoiled. They were terrified. Marcus held them tighter, his mind racing. What had been happening in this house while he was away? How long had my children been suffering, and how had I been so blind? Veronica's heels clicked against the marble as she stepped closer, still smiling. That fake smile. "Darling, why don't you handle them? I must be tired from your trip. Go rest. I'll make some tea." But Marcus didn't move. He stayed crouched on the floor, his arms wrapped protectively around his children. For the first time, he wasn't running from the pain. He was standing in it, staring it straight in the face. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Marcus held his children close, his chest rising and falling with the weight of everything he had just seen. His mind raced. The torn dress, the bruises, Mary's silence, James's thin, fragile body. He had been gone too long, blind for too long. And now, standing in his own living room, he saw the truth. His children had been suffering in silence, and he hadn't been there to protect them. The air felt heavy, suffocating. Veronica's perfume, sweet and cloying, filled the room. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened like blades. "Marcus," she said smoothly, her voice dripping with false concern, "don't let your imagination run wild. Children get messy. They cry, they bruise. That's what kids do." She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Don't make yourself the villain here. You've been gone. I've been the one raising them." Marcus's jaw tightened. Her words cut deep because there was truth in them. He had been gone. He had buried himself in work, convincing himself that providing financially was enough. But now, looking at Mary's trembling shoulders and James's red, tear-stained cheeks, Marcus knew money had never been enough. He glanced back at Mrs. Deborah, her hands twisted nervously in front of her apron. She wanted to speak, but fear held her back. Mary shifted in his arms, her little fingers gripping his sleeve. "Daddy?" Her voice was so soft, Marcus had to lean down to hear her. "Are we in trouble?" The words stabbed straight into his heart. "No, sweetheart," Marcus whispered, kissing the top of her messy hair. "You're not in trouble. You're safe now." Veronica's laugh rang through the room, high-pitched and mocking. "Safe? Marcus, really? You've been gone for months, and now you swoop in like a hero? You don't know what these kids are like when you're not here. They need discipline. They need structure. I've been giving them that." Marcus rose to his full height, James still in his arms, Mary clutching his leg. His eyes locked on Veronica's. "Discipline doesn't leave bruises. Discipline doesn't make a child beg not to be hurt. Discipline doesn't starve a baby." For a fraction of a second, Veronica's mask cracked. Her smile slipped, and her eyes sharpened like blades. Then, just as quickly, she smoothed her expression, tilting her head as if she were the picture of patience. "You're tired," she said sweetly. "You're seeing things that aren't there. Why don't you let me take the children upstairs? You can rest." "No," Marcus snapped, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "I'll take care of them. You've done enough." Veronica's nostrils flared, but she forced a soft laugh. "Whatever you think is best, dear." She turned, her heels clicking sharply as she walked toward the kitchen, but Marcus noticed the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her hands curled into fists at her sides. When she disappeared around the corner, the house seemed to exhale. Marcus crouched again, setting James gently on the couch and brushing Mary's tangled hair back from her face. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "tell me what happened to your dress. Did someone hurt you?" Mary's lip trembled. She looked toward the kitchen, fear flashing in her eyes.
Then she shook her head quickly, whispering, I fell. Marcus's heart broke. He could see the lie in her eyes, the way her small body shrank into itself. She wanted to tell the truth, but was too afraid. James whimpered again, and as Marcus adjusted him in his arms, he caught sight of more marks along the baby's arms. His vision blurred with fury. Tiny, finger-shaped bruises, impossible to mistake. He clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. Veronica did this, he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. A soft cough drew his attention. Mrs. Deborah had stepped further into the room, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Johnson, we should talk. In private." Marcus nodded, his throat burning. He scooped James back into his arms, reached for Mary's hand, and stood tall. "Come on, sweetheart. Daddy's got you now." Mary clung to him like a lifeline. As Marcus led his children upstairs toward the nursery, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. His home had been poisoned. What he had just witnessed was only the surface. The real truth, the full truth, was still hidden, and he was determined to uncover it, no matter how painful it might be. Because now, he wasn't just a grieving husband or an absent father. He was awake, he was present, and he was ready to fight for his children.
The nursery smelled faintly of baby powder and lavender, a room decorated with soft blue walls and neatly arranged toys. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Too perfect. But when Marcus carried James inside, he noticed the crib pushed awkwardly into the far corner, almost hidden behind a chair. He frowned. It looked less like a place of comfort and more like something tucked away, forgotten. Mary sat on the edge of the bed, swinging her thin legs, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't speak. James whimpered in Marcus's arms until he found his thumb and began to suck on it. Marcus changed his son into clean pajamas, his hands shaking as he noticed just how light the baby felt, far too light for an 8-month-old. His chest constricted with guilt. "Mary," Marcus asked gently, crouching in front of her, "Sweetheart, tell me what your days are like when Daddy's not here." Mary lowered her eyes, her small voice barely above a whisper. We try to be good, Daddy. We try really hard." Marcus's throat tightened. "What do you mean by try to be good?" Her voice shrank even smaller. "We have to be quiet. We can't make messes. We can't ask for food when we're hungry, unless it's mealtime." Marcus's hands froze mid-button on James's shirt. "What happens if you get hungry between meals?" Mary's eyes filled with tears. She says we're greedy. She says we should be grateful for what we get." Marcus felt heat rise in his chest. "And what do you get to eat?" Mary sniffled. "Sometimes bread, sometimes just water." She looked up at her father then, her eyes wide and searching. "Daddy, are we bad children? Veronica says we're ungrateful. She says we don't appreciate how hard she works." Marcus knelt fully, taking her thin, trembling hands into his. They felt cold, fragile. "No, baby girl, you are not bad children. You are good, sweet, wonderful children, and you should never, ever have to go hungry." Mary's tears spilled over, but this time they weren't the terrified tears from before. They were the tears of release, of finally letting go of the sadness she had held inside for too long. Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding both Mary and James close, whispering, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't here to protect you." A quiet knock came at the door. Marcus turned to see Mrs. Deborah standing there, her wrinkled hands clasped together, her face full of sorrow. "Mr. Johnson," she said softly, "may I speak with you?"
Marcus helped Mary onto the bed beside James and followed Deborah into the small sitting room down the hall. It was the same room where Sarah used to plan meals with her years ago. Tonight, the space felt heavy with unspoken truths. "Mrs. Deborah," Marcus said, his voice raw, "please, tell me everything." Tears welled in her eyes. "I should have called you sooner. I should have found a way to tell you. But Veronica, she threatened me. She said if I spoke up, she'd ruin me. She'd tell people I was stealing money from the house, and no one would ever hire me again. She said she'd make sure I lost everything." Marcus clenched his fists, fury surging through him. "But the children," Deborah continued, her voice breaking, "the things she's done to them when you're gone." "Tell me," Marcus demanded, though his heart already ached with dread. Deborah's voice trembled. "She locks them in their rooms for hours, sometimes the whole day. She gives them one small meal and calls it teaching them gratitude. Last week, when little Mary spilled some juice, Veronica made her scrub the entire kitchen floor with a rag the size of her hand. It took 3 hours, and her knees were bleeding when she finished." Marcus's stomach churned. He felt sick. "And James?" Deborah's tears spilled down her cheeks. "She barely feeds him. She says he cries too much, that he needs to learn to be quiet. I've heard him cry for hours, but she won't let me go to him. She says the only way he'll learn is if no one comforts him." Marcus gripped the back of a chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I tried to call you once, but Veronica caught me. She took my phone and said if I tried again, she'd accuse me of theft. She said no one would believe an old nanny over a wealthy man's wife." Marcus's eyes stung with tears. Veronica had been clever, isolating everyone, silencing the children, controlling Deborah through fear. And he had been too blind to see it. Deborah reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a worn phone. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the gallery. Marcus leaned in, his breath catching with every image. Photos of Mary's scraped knees, bruises on her arms. Photos of James looking far too thin, red marks dotting his tiny body. Photos of locked bedroom doors with chains on the outside. Marcus's hands trembled as he held the phone. Proof, real, undeniable proof. "You were brave," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Braver than I was. You may have saved my children's lives." Deborah reached across the small table, resting her hand on his. "What are you going to do now, Mr. Johnson?" Marcus looked back toward the nursery where Mary and James were resting. His eyes hardened with resolve. "I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago. I'm going to fight for my children."
Marcus sat in his study long after the house had gone quiet, the glow of the desk lamp casting shadows across the polished mahogany. On the surface, everything looked the same shelves of legal books Sarah once teased him for never reading, the same framed certificates from his business career. But the man sitting there tonight wasn't the same. His heart felt torn apart. The phone in his hand still displayed the gallery of images Deborah had shown him. Mary on her knees, scrubbing the floor with tears streaking her face. James, his tiny ribs too visible beneath his skin. A locked door with fresh scratches around the handle where Mary had tried desperately to get out. Every picture was a knife in Marcus's chest. For years, he had thought of himself as a strong man, a leader, someone in control. But tonight, staring at those photos, Marcus saw what he truly was, a father who had failed his children. He pressed his palms to his eyes, fighting back the burning shame. No more hiding, no more excuses. A quiet knock came at the door. Mary peeked her small head inside, her voice timid. "Daddy?" Marcus quickly wiped his face and smiled weakly. "Yes, sweetheart." She stepped in, her bare feet padding across the rug. "Can you sit with us tonight? James cries less when you're near." His chest tightened. "Of course, baby girl. I'll be right there." Mary nodded and turned back toward the hallway. But before she left, she looked over her shoulder, her voice small. "Please don't leave us again." The door clicked shut, leaving Marcus alone with her words. They echoed in his mind like a command. "Don't leave us again." He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he hadn't called in years. Richard Thomas. Richard had been his roommate back in college, one of the few people who truly knew Marcus before the success, before the marble floors and designer suits. Richard had gone on to become a respected attorney, specializing in family law. If there was anyone Marcus could trust, it was him. Marcus pressed call. After 2 rings, a familiar deep voice answered. "Well, well, Marcus Johnson. Been a long time, brother." "Richard," Marcus said, his voice raw. "I need your help. It's about my kids." There was a pause on the other end. Then Richard's tone shifted instantly, serious and steady. "Tell me everything." Marcus didn't hold back. He told Richard about Mary's torn dress, James's bruises, Deborah's testimony, and the photos. His voice cracked more than once, but Richard listened silently until Marcus finished. Finally, Richard spoke. "Marcus, listen to me. You've got enough here to file for emergency custody. The court takes child abuse very seriously, but we have to move fast before Veronica tries to cover her tracks." "I'll do whatever it takes," Marcus said firmly. "Good. Tomorrow morning, we'll go to the courthouse, bring Deborah, bring the kids if necessary, and make sure those photos are ready. The judge will need to see them." Marcus exhaled, a mix of fear and relief washing over him. "Richard, I should have seen this sooner. I should have—" "Stop." Richard's voice was sharp, but compassionate. "Don't waste time on what you should have done. What matters is what you're doing now. You're fighting for them. That's what counts." Marcus nodded slowly, gripping the phone tighter. "You're right. I'm not losing them again." When he hung up, he sat for a long moment in silence. The house creaked softly, the kind of nighttime sounds he had long ignored. But now every sound felt alive, like the house itself was bearing witness. He rose and walked back to the nursery. Mary and James were curled together on the bed, James's tiny hand resting on his sister's arm. Mary stirred when she felt her father's presence, blinking sleepily. "Daddy?" "I'm here," Marcus whispered, lowering himself beside them. He pulled a blanket over the 2 children and gently stroked their hair. Mary's eyes fluttered closed again, but not before she whispered, "You won't let her hurt us anymore." Marcus kissed her forehead, his voice steady. "Never again, baby girl. Daddy's here now. Daddy's gonna keep you safe." As he held his children, Marcus felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt since Sarah was alive. Strength, resolution. Tomorrow he would stand before a judge. Tomorrow he would face Veronica head-on. Tomorrow he would fight with everything he had, not as a businessman, not as a grieving widower, but as a father. And this time, he would not fail.
The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee, a mixture of order and tension. Morning light streamed through the high windows, catching dust in the air as though time itself had slowed. Marcus sat at the long oak table beside his attorney, Richard Thomas, his palms pressed firmly against his knees, his heart hammered with every breath. Across the aisle, Veronica sat with her lawyer, Michelle Williams. Veronica wore a navy blue dress, her hair swept elegantly into a bun. A tissue trembled in her hand as she dabbed dry eyes. To anyone who didn't know her, she looked like the very picture of a grieving, misunderstood stepmother. But Marcus knew better now. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise!" The Honorable Judge Angela Davis presiding. Everyone stood as Judge Davis entered. She was a tall black woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back neatly. Her eyes, though kind,
carried the weight of years spent protecting children in difficult cases. She took her seat. "You may be seated," she said, her voice steady. Richard stood first. "Your Honor, we are here today on an emergency custody petition. My client, Mr. Marcus Johnson, seeks immediate and full custody of his children, Mary Johnson, age 6, and James Johnson, 8 months old. We intend to prove that Mrs. Veronica Johnson has subjected these children to systematic abuse and neglect." Michelle Williams rose gracefully. "Your Honor, these are grave accusations. My client, Mrs. Johnson, has been nothing but a loving stepmother who sacrificed her own life to care for 2 children abandoned emotionally by their father. We will show that these claims are exaggerated and motivated by guilt rather than fact." Judge Davis nodded. "Very well. Mr. Thomas, proceed with your first witness." Richard turned. "We call Deborah Williams to the stand." Deborah, the family's longtime housekeeper, walked slowly to the witness chair. Her back was straight, but Marcus could see her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Richard approached gently. "Mrs. Williams, how long have you worked for the Johnson family?" 10 years, she replied, her voice soft but steady. "Since Mary was a baby. I helped care for her, and later for James, when Sarah, Mrs. Johnson's first wife, was alive." "And during that time, did you observe the home environment?" "Yes, sir. When Sarah was alive, the home was full of love. She cared for those children with all her heart. After she passed, things changed." "Changed in what way?" Deborah's eyes flickered toward Veronica, who gave her a cold smile. She took a shaky breath. At first, Veronica acted kind, but when Mr. Johnson was away, she became someone else. She locked the children in their rooms for hours. She withheld food. She shouted and threatened them. She treated those babies like burdens, not blessings. The courtroom murmured softly. Judge Davis raised her hand. "Order." Richard continued. "Did you witness physical harm?" "Yes. I saw bruises on Murray's arms, finger marks on James' tiny body. I begged her to be gentle, but Veronica would threaten me, said she'd ruin me, make sure I never worked again." "Why didn't you tell Mr. Johnson sooner?" Tears welled in Deborah's eyes. "Because she controlled everything. She watched my phone, checked my calls. Once, when I tried to contact him, she accused me of stealing. I was terrified, but I couldn't stand by. So I started taking pictures." Richard handed a folder of photographs to the bailiff, who passed them to Judge Davis. The judge studied each image, her face tightening at the sight of Mary's bruised knees, James's gaunt frame, the door latch fixed from the outside. "These photographs are strong evidence," Judge Davis said quietly. Michelle rose, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Objection, Your Honor. Children get bruises from play. These images prove nothing." Judge Davis raised an eyebrow. "Overruled. You'll have your chance on cross-examination." Richard nodded. No further questions. Michelle strode to the witness stand, her smile sharp. "Mrs. Williams, isn't it true that you never liked my client from the beginning?" Deborah shook her head. "That's not true. I welcomed her into the home." Michelle pressed. "And isn't it also true that you feared losing your position once Veronica became mistress of the house?" "I feared for the children, not my job." Michelle leaned closer, her voice firm. "But you didn't call the police, you didn't go to child services. Instead, you waited until now, conveniently when Mr. Johnson is trying to take custody. How can this court trust your word?" Deborah's chin lifted. "Because I lived it. I saw those children starving. I heard them crying through locked doors.
I stayed because someone had to protect them until Mr. Johnson could see the truth. Michelle frowned, sensing the jury of public opinion in the room was swaying. She tried another angle. Mrs. Williams, how old are you? 62. Do you wear glasses? Yes. So it's possible, isn't it, that your vision misled you, that what you thought were bruises might have been shadows, that what you thought was hunger might have been fussiness? Deborah's eyes flashed with quiet fire. No, ma'am. My eyes may need help to read small print, but I know the difference between a hungry baby and a fed one. I know the sound of a child begging for food, and I know abuse when I see it. For the first time, Michelle faltered. She smoothed her papers and stepped back. No further questions. Deborah stepped down slowly, her shoulders heavy, but her gaze proud. Marcus caught her eye and mouthed, "Thank you." She gave the smallest nod. Judge Davis turned to Marcus's table. "Mr. Thomas, call your next witness." Marcus's stomach clenched. He knew what was coming. Richard looked at him, then at the judge. "Your Honor, our next witness is young Mary Johnson. We believe her testimony is essential." Gasps whispered through the courtroom. Veronica stiffened, her perfect smile faltering for the briefest moment. Marcus felt his daughter's small hand grip his tightly under the table. The judge leaned forward. "Is the child willing to testify?" Marcus looked into Mary's wide, frightened eyes. He bent close, his voice barely a whisper. "Only if you want to, sweetheart. Daddy will be right here." Mary swallowed hard, then nodded. "I want to tell the truth." The judge gave her a kind smile. "Very well. Bring the child forward." As Mary walked toward the witness stand, tiny and brave, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The next words out of her mouth could change everything.
The courtroom felt impossibly large as little Mary Johnson walked toward the witness stand. Her pink dress, carefully chosen by Deborah that morning, looked slightly too big on her thin frame. Her shiny black hair, neatly braided, swung against her back as she climbed the tall chair. Her legs dangled, not even close to reaching the floor. Judge Davis leaned forward, her eyes soft. "Hello, Mary. My name is Judge Davis. Thank you for coming to talk to me today." Mary's voice was barely a whisper. "Hello." "Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" the bailiff asked. "Yes, sir," Mary said, her small voice trembling. Marcus's heart ached as he watched from the table. He wanted to scoop her up, shield her from everything. But this was her moment, her chance to be heard. Judge Davis spoke gently. "Mary, can you tell me what life was like at home when Veronica was there?" Mary's eyes flickered toward her father, then back to the judge. "When Daddy was home, she was nice. She cooked good food and smiled. But when Daddy left, everything changed." "How did it change?" Judge Davis asked softly. Mary's little hands twisted in her lap. "She yelled a lot. She locked us in our rooms, sometimes all day. Sometimes she didn't give us food. She said we were greedy if we asked." A hush fell over the courtroom. Even Michelle Williams shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "And what about your baby brother James?" the judge asked. Mary's voice cracked. "He cried 'cause he was hungry. She said he had to learn to be quiet. She grabbed his arms really hard. I tried to make him stop crying so she wouldn't be mad, but he's just a baby. He couldn't help it." Marcus's eyes stinged with tears. He clenched his fists under the table, forcing himself to stay calm for his daughter's sake. Judge Davis's tone was gentle but firm. "Mary, did Veronica ever tell you not to tell your father?" "Yes, ma'am. She said if I told Daddy, she'd throw me and James out on the street. She said no one would want bad children like us." Mary's words sliced through the courtroom like a blade.
Veronica's mask cracked for a moment, her jaw tightening before she forced her sweet smile back into place. Judge Davis leaned closer. "Mary, why did you decide to speak today?" Mary's small chin lifted, her eyes filling with tears but shining with determination. "Because James can't talk. He's too little. Somebody has to protect him. If I don't tell the truth, she might hurt him again." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the scratch of Judge Davis's pen as she took notes. "Thank you, Mary. You are very brave." Marcus thought it was over, but then Michelle Williams rose, smoothing her suit jacket. "Your Honor, I request permission to ask the child a few questions." Marcus's stomach sank. Richard started to object, but Judge Davis raised a hand. "I'll allow a few, Miss Williams. Keep them appropriate." Michelle approached Mary with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Mary. You love your daddy very much, don't you?" "Yes." "And you missed him when he traveled for work?" "Yes." "Sometimes, when we miss someone, our feelings make us remember things differently. Do you think maybe you thought Veronica was meaner than she really was because you were sad your daddy was gone?" Mary blinked, confused. "No, ma'am. She was mean even when I wasn't sad. She was mean every day." Michelle's smile faltered. She tried again. "Mary, isn't it possible that Veronica was just teaching you rules? Sometimes children don't understand the difference between discipline and punishment." Mary sat up straighter. Her voice grew stronger. "I know the difference. My mommy Sarah gave me rules, but she was never mean. Rules don't make your tummy hurt. Rules don't make you scared to go to sleep. Veronica wasn't teaching us, she was hurting us." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Michelle's smile hardened. "Mary, are you sure you're not making this up to make your daddy happy?" Mary's eyes flashed with sudden fire. "No, ma'am, I'm telling the truth. I don't want Daddy to be happy. I want James to be safe." For the first time, Michelle had no comeback. She stepped back slowly. Before Judge Davis could respond, Veronica shot to her feet, her voice shrill. "That little liar! She's making this all up. I was nothing but good to those ungrateful children." "Order in the court!" Judge Davis banged her gavel, but Veronica couldn't stop. Years of carefully constructed sweetness cracked apart in an instant. "Yes, I locked them up. Yes, I made them wait for food. Someone had to teach them respect. If Marcus had been a real father instead of chasing money, none of this would have happened." Michelle frantically tugged at Veronica's arm, whispering her to sit down, but Veronica shook her off, eyes blazing with fury. "You think you can take everything from me? You'll all be sorry, you and your brat children." The bailiff moved swiftly, gripping her arms. Judge Davis's voice cut through the chaos. "Mrs. Johnson, I find you in contempt of court. Remove her immediately." As Veronica was dragged out, still cursing, the courtroom fell into stunned silence. Mary, still sitting in the witness chair, looked smaller than ever, but her face was steady. Judge Davis leaned forward. "Mary, you did exactly the right thing. You told the truth, and you were very brave." Mary nodded quietly. "Thank you, ma'am. Would you like to go back to your daddy now?" "Yes." She climbed down, her tiny shoes clicking softly against the wooden floor. Marcus met her halfway, scooping her into his arms. He kissed her forehead, whispering, "You were so brave, baby girl. Daddy is so proud of you." Mary buried her face in his chest, her little body trembling. "It's over now, right, Daddy?" Marcus hugged her tighter, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart, it's over." But he knew the judge still had to make it official.
The courtroom was still echoing from Veronica's outburst when Judge Angela Davis lifted her gavel once more, demanding order. The bailiff had just escorted Veronica out, her furious voice fading down the hallway, but the tension remained thick in the air. Marcus held Mary tightly on his lap, his arms wrapped around her trembling body. Deborah sat nearby, rocking baby James gently, as though her steady presence alone could shield him from everything that had just happened. Richard stood firm at the defense table, his files neatly stacked, but his eyes blazing with conviction. Judge Davis let the silence linger for a long moment before speaking. Her tone was steady, her voice clear and measured. "I have heard all testimony, reviewed all evidence, and witnessed the conduct of the parties involved." She glanced at the papers before her, then fixed her gaze on Marcus. "This court does not make such decisions lightly. The well-being of the children always comes first." Marcus's breath caught. This was it, the moment that would decide the rest of Mary and James's lives. Judge Davis continued, her words slow but deliberate. "We have testimony from Mrs. Deborah Williams, a caretaker with 10 years of service to this family, supported by photographic evidence documenting physical neglect and abuse. We have testimony from Mr. Marcus Johnson, who, despite his professional obligations, has demonstrated immediate action once the abuse came to light. Most importantly, we have heard directly from Mary Johnson, who, despite her very young age, spoke with clarity, courage, and consistency." The judge's voice softened for a moment. Her words carried the unmistakable ring of truth, and they were confirmed, tragically, by the conduct of Mrs. Veronica Johnson in this very courtroom. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. Mrs. Johnson's outburst, her admission of locking the children in their rooms and withholding meals, and her continued hostility toward the minors confirm what the evidence has already shown: a pattern of abuse, neglect, and psychological harm. Richard exhaled quietly, nodding to himself. Marcus gripped Mary's hand tighter. Judge Davis's expression hardened. "Therefore, effective immediately, I am granting Mr. Marcus Johnson full and permanent custody of his children, Mary Johnson and James Johnson. Mrs. Veronica Johnson is to have no contact whatsoever with the minors, no visitation, no phone calls, no letters. She is barred from approaching their home, school, or places of care." Mary looked up at her father, her eyes wide, almost disbelieving. Marcus kissed the top of her head, whispering, "You're safe now, baby." Judge Davis continued, "Furthermore, this case will be referred to the district attorney's office for a criminal investigation into Mrs. Johnson's actions. This court has reason to believe that her conduct constitutes child abuse and neglect under state law." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Deborah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears of relief. Richard placed a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder, silently congratulating him. Marcus closed his eyes, overwhelmed. He had braced himself for a fight, for the possibility of appeals and drawn-out custody battles, but instead the truth had prevailed swiftly thanks to his daughter's courage. Judge Davis lowered her voice, addressing Marcus directly. "Mr. Johnson, I urge you to reflect on your role in this situation. While you were not the perpetrator, your absence created space for this abuse to occur unchecked. You must not allow your work or personal grief to overshadow your duty as a father. These children need you, fully present, every day." Marcus nodded solemnly, his voice firm despite the lump in his throat. "Yes, Your Honor, I will never fail them again." The judge's expression softened. "See that you don't. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. For a heartbeat, the room was utterly still. Then, as if a dam had broken, Deborah began to cry softly, clutching James closer. Richard shook Marcus's hand, his grip strong. He whispered, "You did it."
You and that little girl, you both did it." Marcus bent down, looking into Mary's tired but shining eyes. "Sweetheart, did you hear what the judge said? You and James are staying with Daddy, forever. No one can hurt you again." Mary's lip trembled before a small smile broke through. She threw her arms around his neck, whispering, "We're safe." "Yes," Marcus said, tears spilling freely now. "You're safe." As they gathered their belongings, Marcus noticed reporters waiting outside the tall courthouse windows. He braced himself. The world would want to know what had happened here today. But as he looked at his children, he realized it didn't matter what anyone else thought. What mattered was that Mary and James were free. Deborah, still wiping her tears, touched Marcus's arm. "Sarah would be so proud of you right now." Marcus swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "I hope so." Together, they walked out of the courtroom. Reporters swarmed immediately, cameras flashing, microphones pushed forward, voices shouting over one another. "Mr. Johnson, how do you feel about the judge's ruling? What message do you have for other parents? How long had the abuse gone on?" Marcus raised one hand, his voice calm but firm. "Please, my children have been through enough. We just want to go home." He turned, guiding Mary and James through the chaos, shielding them with his body. But a sudden voice pierced through the noise, a voice Marcus would recognize anywhere. "You think you've won?" Everyone turned. Veronica, handcuffed and flanked by officers, was being escorted toward a police car. Her hair was messy, her face red with rage. Even restrained, her venomous words carried far. "You took everything from me, Marcus, everything. But this isn't over. Those kids will never be happy. I'll make sure of it." Mary stiffened in her father's arms, trembling. Marcus pulled her closer, his protective instinct surging. He looked straight at Veronica, his voice steady, low, but loud enough for her and the reporters to hear. "You're wrong, Veronica. You didn't give up your life for these children. You tried to destroy theirs, but they're stronger than you, and they're safe now. That's all that matters." He turned his back on her, walking toward the car where Richard was waiting to drive them home. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed wildly, but Marcus focused only on buckling Mary and James safely into their seats. As the car pulled away, Mary reached across to hold James's hand. "It's okay now, James. Daddy's here. We're safe." Marcus heard her words and felt something shift inside him. The shame, the guilt, the grief, all of it began to loosen its grip. For the first time in years, he felt hope. The nightmare was over, and the future was theirs. The courthouse doors closed behind them, shutting out the noise of reporters and the lingering venom of Veronica's last threats. For the first time in months, maybe even years, Marcus felt like he could finally breathe. He carried James in one arm while holding Mary's small hand firmly in the other. Deborah walked beside them, her steps steady despite the tears still glistening on her cheeks. As Richard drove them away from downtown, the city streets blurred past the car windows. Marcus glanced into the rearview mirror. Mary sat close to James in the back seat, her arm wrapped around her little brother protectively. She whispered to him softly, like she had done countless times before, but this time there was no fear in her voice, only reassurance. "It's over now, James," she murmured. "Daddy's here. Nobody can hurt us anymore." Marcus's chest tightened, tears burning his eyes. He gripped the steering wheel harder, making a silent vow. "I will never let them feel that fear again." The first night home. Back at the house, everything felt different. The marble floors and grand chandeliers no longer seemed cold and empty.
Marcus carried James upstairs to the nursery, noticing every detail he had once overlooked. The crib shoved into the corner, the toys that looked untouched, the faint marks on the door where it had been locked from the outside. He shuddered. No more. Never again. That night, instead of retreating to his office, Marcus spread blankets across the living room floor. He, Mary, James, and Deborah all slept together in the same space, the children tucked safely under his arms. Mary woke once from a nightmare, but when she saw her father's face beside her, she settled quickly. James slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Marcus stayed awake long after everyone else had drifted off, watching his children breathe, listening to their soft sounds. For years he had been absent, but now he was present in the truest sense, and he would not leave again. Therapy and healing. In the days that followed, Richard helped Marcus secure counseling services for both children. The first therapy session was difficult. Mary sat quietly, clinging to James and refusing to speak. But over time, with gentle encouragement, she began to open up. She talked about the fear, the hunger, the threats. She also spoke about her mother, Sarah, remembering the songs she used to sing and the way she smelled of lavender. James, too, young to express his trauma in words, clung to toys tightly, sometimes bursting into tears when left alone even for a moment. But slowly, with patience and love, he began to relax. His laughter returned, filling the house with a sound Marcus hadn't realized how desperately he missed. Marcus himself also attended therapy, encouraged by Richard. Facing his grief over Sarah's death, his guilt for being absent, and his anger at Veronica was not easy. But as the weeks passed, he began to forgive himself, not because he deserved it, but because his children needed him whole. Deborah's role. Deborah stayed with them, not just as a housekeeper, but as a grandmother figure. She cooked hearty meals, taught Mary how to bake cookies, and sang lullabies to James. Sometimes Marcus caught her crying quietly in the kitchen, guilt still lingering for the months she had been silenced by fear. But Marcus always reminded her, "You saved them. You gave me proof. Without you, they might still be suffering." Her presence brought stability. For the children, she was a bridge between the world of loss and the new life they were building. For Marcus, she was a reminder that love came in many forms, not just from family by blood, but also from those who chose to stand and fight alongside you. Facing the world. The media storm swirled for weeks. Veronica's arrest made headlines, and reporters camped outside the house at times. Marcus shielded his children from it as best he could, refusing interviews and declining comment. "The truth has been spoken in court," he told Richard. "That's enough." At school, Mary struggled at first. Whispers followed her in the hallways, kids repeating things they overheard from their parents. But Mary, strengthened by therapy and the unwavering love at home, found her courage. When another girl was teased for her worn-out shoes, Mary stood up, her voice clear. "Don't be mean to her. You don't know what she's been through." Teachers noticed. They called Marcus, praising Mary for her resilience and leadership. Marcus felt his heart swell. His daughter had turned her pain into strength, choosing compassion instead of bitterness. A new life. Months passed, and slowly the shadows lifted. Marcus cut back drastically on his travel, running his business mostly from home. Evenings were spent cooking dinner together, helping Mary with homework or playing peekaboo with James until his giggles filled the house. They transformed the backyard into a garden in Sarah's memory, planting her favorite flowers and vegetables. Mary tended the tomato plants carefully, teaching James how to tie the vines with gentle hands. Marcus often stood at the window, watching them in the sunlight, feeling Sarah's presence in the laughter and growth. One summer afternoon, as they sat around the table eating pasta sauce made from their own tomatoes, Mary looked at her father and said quietly, "Daddy, I'm glad you came home that night." Marcus's throat tightened. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Letting go of the past. The nightmares came less frequently. The house grew warmer, filled with love instead of fear. Marcus tucked his children in each night, reading bedtime stories and whispering promises he now knew he would keep. James began to call out "Daddy" with delight every morning, and Mary started smiling more freely, her eyes no longer haunted. The memory of Veronica still lingered at times, her voice, her threats, but it no longer controlled them. Instead, it became a reminder of their strength, of what they had survived and overcome. One evening, as Marcus watched his children chase fireflies in the yard, he whispered a prayer to Sarah. "I failed once, but never again. They're safe now. They're loved, and I'll protect them for the rest of my life." In that moment, with laughter echoing through the twilight and tiny lights glowing in the garden, Marcus knew the wounds would heal, the past would fade, and the Johnson family was finally free. 2 years had passed since that day in court, yet Marcus could still remember every detail as if it were yesterday. The trembling in Mary's voice, James's tiny hand clutching his sister, the sharp crack of Judge Davis's gavel. Those memories would never leave him. But today, standing at the kitchen counter with the morning sunlight streaming in, Marcus realized something else. The pain had transformed into strength. The Johnson house was no longer a place of fear. It was alive again, full of laughter, music, and the comforting chaos of family. A garden of healing. Outside, the backyard had become a sanctuary. Where once the grass had grown wild and neglected, now stood rows of tomato plants, sunflowers, and a small patch of lavender in honor of Sarah. The garden was Mary's pride. At 11 years old, she was taller now, her once haunted eyes filled with confidence. That morning, Marcus watched through the kitchen window as she showed James, now 9, how to tie up the tomato vines. "Snug enough to hold them, but loose enough so they can grow," she explained patiently. James nodded, mimicking her movements, dirt smudging his cheeks. "Like this?" "Perfect," Mary said, smiling. Marcus felt his chest swell with pride. Those 2 children had endured more than most adults, yet here they were, thriving, growing, loving. Sarah would have been so proud. Daily life reimagined. After the garden, they gathered in the kitchen. Deborah, who had become more like a grandmother than a housekeeper, was already pulling fresh cookies from the oven. James darted forward, but Mary caught his arm. "Not until after lunch," she teased, echoing Deborah's gentle rules. They sat together at the table for breakfast, Marcus, Mary, James, and Deborah. It was simple food, scrambled eggs, toast, and fruit. But to Marcus, it felt like a feast, not for what was on the table, but for who sat around it. As they ate, James rattled off questions like he always did. "Daddy, why do bees make honey? Can we build a tree house this summer? Do you think stars make noise?" Marcus laughed, answering as best he could, loving every curious spark in his son's eyes. Mary chimed in, talking about her new role at school. She had become the kind of girl who looked out for others, the one teachers could rely on. "I don't let anyone get bullied. Nobody deserves to feel small," she said proudly. Marcus's throat tightened. Her courage had become a shield, not only for James, but for others too. A father reborn. Marcus's own life had changed completely. The man who once buried himself in business trips was gone. He still worked, but he worked mostly from home now, structuring his days around his children. Every morning he drove them to school. Every evening he helped with homework or read bedtime stories. He had become the father Sarah always believed he could be. Sometimes, guilt still whispered in his mind, reminding him of the months he wasn't there. But whenever those thoughts surfaced, Mary or James would reach for his hand, grounding him in the present. They didn't need a perfect father, they needed a present one. And that is who he was now. Remembering Sarah. The garden also became a place of remembrance. On Sundays, they tended Sarah's lavender and shared stories about her. Deborah would recall how Sarah laughed when flour covered her during baking disasters. Marcus told the children how she loved to dance barefoot in the kitchen. Mary remembered her mother's lullabies, and though James had been a baby when she passed, he said he sometimes dreamed of a woman's soft voice singing to him. Through these rituals, Sarah remained part of their lives, not a shadow of grief, but a light guiding them forward. A moment of peace. One warm evening, Marcus sat outside while the children chased fireflies. Deborah rocked gently on the porch swing, humming a hymn. Mary caught a glowing insect and cupped it carefully in her hands, showing it to James before letting it fly free. Their laughter floated through the air, blending with the faint scent of lavender. James ran over, breathless. "Daddy, look! I caught two at once!" Marcus kneeled, smiling wide. "That's amazing, buddy!" Mary came up behind her brother, rolling her eyes playfully. He let one go by accident. "Did not!" James protested, but his grin betrayed him. Marcus laughed, pulling them both close. "You two are my greatest light. Do you know that?" Mary tilted her head. "Even brighter than fireflies?" "Much brighter," he said, kissing the top of her head. The promise. Later that night, Marcus tucked James into bed. The boy yawned, his eyelids heavy. "Daddy, are you going to work tomorrow?" Marcus smoothed the blanket over him. "I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere." James smiled sleepily. "Good. I love you. I love you too, son." Down the hall, Marcus peeked into Mary's room. She was reading under her blanket with a flashlight. He chuckled. "Lights out, young lady." "Just one more page, please." He shook his head, smiling. "Fine, but only one." As he turned to leave, Mary called softly, "Daddy?" "Yes?" "Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for believing me." Marcus's eyes stung. He walked back, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Thank you for being brave enough to speak. You saved us all, Mary." When the house finally fell quiet, Marcus stepped outside one last time. The moonlight bathed the garden, the tomato plants tall and strong, supported but free to grow, just like his children. He looked up at the sky and whispered a vow to Sarah. "I will never let grief, work, or fear pull me away again. They are my life, my purpose, and I will love and protect them every day I have left." As he stood there, the sound of Mary and James breathing peacefully inside the house, Marcus felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. True, unshakable peace. The storm was long behind them. The future stretched ahead, bright and promising. And for the Johnson family, tomorrow was no longer something to fear. Tomorrow was a gift. The story of Marcus Johnson and his children did not end with the gavel striking in Judge Davis's courtroom, nor with the laughter in their backyard garden 2 years later. Their journey is more than just a tale of survival. It is a living lesson about love, responsibility, and the courage it takes to listen when the smallest voices speak. The father who woke up. For years, Marcus had buried himself in the armor of work, convincing himself that providing money and stability was enough. He wore his grief like a mask, unable to face the gaping wound Sarah's death had left in his life. And in that silence, danger crept into his home unnoticed. But the night he walked into his house and heard Mary's trembling plea, Marcus woke up. He realized that being a father wasn't about the size of your office or the weight of your paycheck. It was about presence, about seeing, hearing, and protecting your children when they are too small to protect themselves. That awakening was painful, filled with shame, regret, and anger. But it was also redemptive. Marcus turned his guilt into resolve. And in doing so, he became the father his children had always needed. The courage of a child. If Marcus was the shield, Mary was the sword. At just 6 years old, she stood in a courtroom filled with adults and told the truth that many grown-ups were too afraid to speak. Her testimony was not polished or rehearsed. It was raw, simple, and pure. And that purity cut deeper than any lawyer's argument. She showed the world that children know the difference between discipline and cruelty, between rules and fear. Mary's courage is a reminder that sometimes the bravest voices come from the smallest bodies. And when a child dares to speak the truth, the duty of adults is to listen fully, humbly, and without excuse. The quiet hero. Deborah, too, deserves her place in this story. For months, she lived under the same roof, silenced by fear of losing her job and reputation. Yet she still found a way to protect the children by documenting the abuse in secret, risking everything to gather proof. Her photos became the turning point, the undeniable evidence that saved Mary and James. Deborah is proof that courage doesn't always roar in the spotlight. Sometimes it works quietly in the shadows, waiting for the moment to act. The power of truth. Veronica fought with every lie she could muster. She put on the mask of the perfect stepmother, hired the city's most skilled attorney, and tried to twist Marcus's absence into proof of his unfitness as a father. But lies crumble under the weight of truth. The photographs, the testimony, Mary's unwavering words, and even Veronica's own uncontrollable rage revealed reality for all to see. In the end, truth didn't just win in the courtroom. It liberated 2 children from fear and gave them back their childhood. The healing of time. The scars of abuse do not vanish overnight. For Mary and James, healing was a process, a mixture of therapy, love, patience, and time. Nightmares lingered, fears resurfaced, but slowly laughter returned. The sound of children playing replaced the silence of locked doors. The garden became their symbol of growth, plants that needed care, patience, and light, just like them. Marcus's healing mirrored theirs. By choosing to stay present, by facing his grief and guilt instead of hiding from it, he too was reborn. He became not just a provider, but a father in the truest sense. The lesson for all of us. This story resonates far beyond one family. It is a reminder that abuse often hides behind closed doors, cloaked in appearances of perfection. Silence, whether from grief, fear, or complacency, can be as dangerous as cruelty. Children, though small, are capable of profound truth when given the chance to speak. And above all, that love combined with courage can break even the darkest cycles. When Marcus promised never to leave again, when Mary chose to tell the truth despite her fear, when Deborah quietly gathered evidence, each act was a thread. Together, those threads wove a lifeline strong enough to pull 2 children out of the shadows and into the light. A family restored. Now, years later, the Johnson family stands not as victims, but as survivors. Their home is filled with warmth again. Their backyard blooms with Mary's memory. Their future stretches forward with laughter, resilience, and unshakable love. And for Marcus, every bedtime story, every garden tomato, and every whispered "I love you" from his children is proof of one thing: he kept his promise. The shadows are gone. The light remains.